All right. Well, thanks so much, Thiago, for the kind introduction. And as the last speaker, I also like to thank you and Dayun for putting together this very exciting workshop. We are slightly over time, and it's really sunny outside. So I'll try to be as concise as I can. And my presentation is going to explore, as Thiago said, the interface between ethics and neuroscience, with particular focus on the topic of this conference, which is innate and instinctive behavior. And I'm doing this not just as a research fellow at ETH Zurich, but as Thiago mentioned, as a member of the International Neuroethics Society. The INS is a global academic society that tries to advance research on responsible innovation in neuroscience, and it's a large community of neuroscientists, medical professionals, philosophers, lawyers, social scientists that have this common interest in discussing the ethical implications of advancing neuroscience. And since 2017, the INS is a member and a partner of FENS. And you can just look it up on the FENS website. There are a lot of shared activities and a lot of shared benefits for joint memberships, for example, joint membership discounts, as well as book discounts on selected publications, discounts on journal submissions, subscriptions, selected journals that are the interface between ethics and neuroscience, like Age of Neuroscience. There are also opportunities for meeting support. So the INS provides small grants for the organization of meetings on neuroethics related topics, and also discounts on attendance of the annual meeting of INS, which is a satellite event of SFN. So last year, the annual meeting took place in San Diego. Next year is going to be Chicago, and it's usually the 2 days right before SFN start. So it's quite conveniently located for those that want to attend both. That is absolutely possible and encouraged. All right, so what is ethics in the word neuroethics? And I'm pretty sure that everybody's familiar with neuron, with the prefix, but what about the rest? So neuroethics is sometimes described as a dual discipline, following a famous definition by Dino Roskis in 2002. It's both the ethics of neuroscience and the neuroscience of ethics. Now, the ethics of neuroscience is a normative discipline that is concerned with what ought to be, whereas the neuroscience of ethics is a descriptive discipline that is concerned with how X is or what X is. To clarify a little bit better, the ethics of neuroscience is concerned with things like what is good and what is bad in neuroscience, whereas the neuroscience of ethics is concerned with questions like which brain mechanisms underlying moral feelings, moral judgment, and moral behavior. So just a few examples of questions related to the ethics of neuroscience are things like, should we communicate incidental findings to research subjects? So imagine you are running a study about, say, language acquisition, and you are conducting MRI scans on research participants, and at some point you see in the scans a brain tumor in a certain region. What should you do? Do you have a moral obligation to informing the patient, the research participant, about this tumor or not? Were you supposed to consider this possibility at the level of producing your informed consent and things like that? Or should healthy individuals be allowed to use cognition-enhancing tools? As you know, an increasing number of students in high school age use drugs like Adderall and Ritalin to improve their cognitive performance, like attention and awareness. Should this be allowed? Or what information about risks and benefits should you include in the consent form? On the other hand, the neuroscience of ethics is concerned with questions of a different kind, like what are the neural correlates of fair behavior? which brain regions are involved in non-compliance or trust, how can we enhance prosocial behavior among antisocial offenders. So as you see, there are all questions that relate to identifying the underlying neural correlates for morally relevant mental phenomena, such as fairness, non-compliance, trust, altruistic behavior, and so on. All right, so the word ethics in neuroethics referred to ethos, which is the ancient Greek word for habit or custom, and can be defined as a set of standards, obligations, and principles concerning the distinction between good and bad behavior. Now, as I said, since neuroethics is a dual discipline that has not just a component of the ethics of neuroscience, but also the neuroscience of ethics, we also have to provide a dual definition of ethics, and therefore this definition should also encompass the mental faculty that enables the distinction between good and bad behavior. Now, the interface between ethics and the neuroscience of instinctive and innate behavior is not as obvious and intuitive as it would seem. As you probably grasped from the examples that I showed below, most research in neuroethics is concerned with issues of clinical neuroscience. Issues that ethical dilemmas or ethical challenges that arise in relation to involving patients in clinical research or administering neurotechnological interventions or neuropharmacological interventions. A lot of debate, for example, today surrounds issues of translating findings about deep brain stimulation from one patient group to another. But there is actually also a number of issues that could be of probably general interest for this audience at the interface between ethics and the neuroscience of instinctive and innate behavior. And in the following, I will try to unpack this interface and trying to discuss with you what I think are the major issues that might be of general interest in this domain. And this will be very diverse issues, starting with issues about moral controversy surrounding animals involving research, so research on animal models, but also more general issues related to the neuroscience of morality in humans. And we will discuss this in the second part of my presentation. All right, so I'll start with the first topic, which is the interface between ethics and instinctive and innate behavior in relation to a very simple and obvious fact, namely that neuroscience research on innate and instinctive behavior largely relies on animal models, and this is something that we have seen repeatedly during this conference. And as you know, research involving non-human animals often sparks moral disagreement among animal rights supporters, but also in the general population. Now, the ethics of animal research is something that I know is part of your training for most of you, so it will be largely redundant if I tackle it entirely here. So I will just briefly discuss a few issues that I think are particularly interesting also in light of an ever-evolving change in public perceptions in relation to animal research. And I think that we all, as researchers, need to be aware of these changes in public perceptions. So this is a Gallup survey about the moral acceptability of medical testing on animals. And as you can see, the moral acceptability of using animals in medical research has been decreasing quite significantly over time, going from about 65% of people being in agreement with using animals in medical research in the early 2000s. And in 2017, when the survey was conducted, this number went down to about 50%, so a 15% decrease. And simultaneously, and quite symmetrically, as you can see, the number of people that consider involving animals in research as morally wrong has been increasing significantly from about 25% in 2001 to almost 45% in 2017. And interestingly, the number of people in between, which is basically the number of people who don't know, has also been decreasing. So people tend to have a stronger moral opinion in relation to that, and this moral opinion seems to be increasingly negative in relation to using animals in research. And consider that this is, the poll was done about medical research. And there is anecdotal evidence that for non-clinical research, for example, behavioral research, the public perceptions about using animal models is even lower than that. But no systematic survey has been conducted yet.
Who are these people?
It's general adult population in the United States. It's US data. Yeah.
I want to ask two questions. So do you think that this is because we neglect communication part to public, and then we assume that they will understand because what we do is good, and we don't work on convey our message and letting them understand why we're doing something? And that's related to the second point. Might it also, what do you think about the fact that nowadays the biggest breakthrough that we made, they don't really impact people's life like they did in the past. Like when they discovered vaccine, there was millions of people saved. Nowadays, if we discover something, we might say like over 1% of the population. We just don't see the outcome of research.
Yeah, these are two very good and reasonable hypotheses. The second one is a bit abstract and harder to test. The first hypothesis is actually something that is testable to a certain extent, and I will address it in a few seconds. All right, so if you do data breakdown by animal groups, you also see different perceptions. Reasonably, expectedly, most people think that animals, involving animal models with mice is less morally problematic compared to involving bigger mammals like dogs and monkeys. So this is European data, and it shows this different perception in relation to involving respectively dogs and monkeys and other big mammals in research in this part of the graph, and the other graph is about mice. So you can see that mice research is more morally acceptable according to most people, but you also see a lot of inter-country variability. So, for example, in relation to involving larger mammals, perceptions go from Spain, where 65% of people think that it's morally acceptable to involve large mammals in research, to countries like Luxembourg, where only 29% of the population believe that this is morally acceptable. Also, in relation to mice, you see similar trends with Estonia having 81% of the population morally approving research involving mice, and again Luxembourg, which seems to be the most the country with most resistance towards animal research, with less than half of the population, 49% of the population, consider it morally acceptable to involve mice models in research.
Do you think there might be a correlation between the opinions of the given country and the amount of investment they put in animal research? I mean, how much animal research there is in the country? Because in Luxembourg there is not much animal research at all. So I don't know, maybe there's like we go into this direction as
yeah, like access to information and awareness as possible predictors of moral acceptability of animal research. And this is indeed a kind of inference that we could build based on this survey data from a UK survey from 2016 that tried to understand what people's perceptions about animal research are based on by asking them about their views on animal research organizations. And you can, as you can see here, a big chunk of people, 42 to 44% of the population, believe that animal research organizations are secretive. So they keep secrets, they have something to hide. Interestingly enough, 24% of people believe that animal research is not well regulated, which, as you all know, it's quite improbable, in particular in European countries where there is a very strict regulation. Only 10% of people believe that animal research organizations are open about their work. So this seems to corroborate your colleague's hypothesis that indeed there is a problem in communication and public understanding. We probably take for granted that what we're doing is morally right and scientifically beneficial and potentially beneficial for the entire community, but most people in the large non-scientific public do not share the same perception. And probably they have lacking information about what animal research is about, what is it for, and how can it actually contribute to social value. Is that a question? Oh no, all right. Yeah, and as I said, the fact that 24% of the UK respondents believe that there is a lacking regulation and poor regulation, it's quite surprising because the UK at the time where the survey was conducted was a European Union country, and it still is for a little while. And in the European Union, animal research is very strictly regulated according to the 2010 63 EU regulation, the EU directive, which is probably setting the highest bar for animal research globally. And it replaced an earlier directive from 1986, which was already quite advanced, and it's based on the 3 R's. You probably already heard that as part of your training. Replace, reduce, and refine. And this is at core of European legislation. So the fact that so many people believe that animal research is poorly regulated in the UK and Europe, in spite of being so well regulated, seems to indicate that there is a problem of public understanding and information sharing and communication.
So just clarify, it's 24% of people think it is regulated. So basically 76 think it's not.
Right, yeah. All right, and then on the same topic of transparency, there is research that is being conducted and also activism, I would say, campaigning by the EARA, which is the European Association for Research in Animals, and their partners who have tried to fill this gap, and they have tried to create a new transparency agreements on communicating animal research in a variety of countries. The first concordate on openness was signed in UK in 2014, and then many other countries follow, Spain, and then last year Portugal, Belgium, and Austria. And the aim of this transparency agreements is precisely to facilitate information sharing and organize campaigns for public understanding of animal research by highlighting in a very transparent manner what the research is about, what the research is for, and what the risks and benefits associated with research are. These are just few of the flyers. Yes?
I was wondering, have you actually ever thought about the correlation between the use of animal in research and how it's perceived, and the use of animal in intensive production of, for instance, meat? Are these two perceptions correlated? So they don't like animal research for the simple fact that it's using animals, or they just think that it's not useful? Like, do they usually correlate these two facts, or they are completely discorrelated? Because I think they do.
Yeah, this is a good question. To my knowledge, there is no research that tried to combine these data sets, but it actually would be very interesting to do. Yeah, I think it's a reasonable hypothesis. Yeah, so just to say that public understanding of animal research is key and should not just be taken for granted, because what seems obvious to a scientist's eye might not be obvious to the largest portion of the population. And since most of our research is publicly funded, we have a kind of moral obligation towards public accountability of our research. So we cannot just get away with the fact that we're going to receive funds nonetheless, because if these public perceptions grow as they are, at some point they might shift the political switch. And this is something that has already been happening in certain countries, including the one where I was born and raised at, namely Italy, where there is a lot of controversy surrounding animal research that has also led now one of the leading government party to rediscuss the European directive and trying to push derogations to the European directive. So we need to be mindful of this if we want to conduct our research on the long term. All right, so this was the part related to the animal research part of the interface between ethics and instinctive and innate behavior. Do you have any further questions at this stage? Yeah.
So most of the data you show are surveys from the US or Europe.
Yeah.
And they're trying to come up with rules or regulations or whatever. But most of the humans on this planet don't live in Europe or the US.
Yeah.
So maybe this is the European neuroethics, maybe this is the American neuroethics, but saying people say that they don't like animal research, or saying that people, I think it's very important to make sure that you're representing a very small population of people, that this does not represent the planet.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is not a generalization that you can make to the entire human population. We can only make these generalizations related to the countries where the data have been collected. And so far, the most comprehensive and recent surveys on this topic have been conducted in US and European countries. There are smaller survey studies in Japan that show similar association, but of course we need to be more comprehensive. We need more data, especially from the global south, where perceptions can change. And this is something that has been observed, that perceptions about the moral acceptability of animal research have a high degree of cultural variation. So even just the European slide could already show a lot of variation between different European countries, even though they already share a big portion of culture and political institutions. This variability is even higher if you move away from Europe and you compare with more distant countries. So this is absolutely on target remark.
Do you think that the public perception is affecting how grants are allocated? I mean, I don't know if people think the same, but in the UK now a lot of the grants are like for solving like diseases and less for basic research. Do you think it's correlated?
Well, I cannot talk about general correlations. I can talk about small case studies, and this is something that we are experiencing in Switzerland, for example. Many of my colleagues that are involved in animal research, for example, in neurodegenerative disease, are increasingly frustrated about the increasing number of rejection of their studies, both at the grant level, so at the funding agency level, and at the local ethics committee level, for issues related to animal welfare, even though they claim that all the principles of the EU directive have been respected. So this is an instance where this attitude towards moral research are already influencing the way that research is conducted. Which raises a big problem because as a researcher we would believe that as long as we are norm compliant, so we respect the relevant laws of the country that we're working in, everything is fine, but then it seems that disagreement can be generated also at the level of funding agencies, both public and private, and this I can tell is something that has been generated a big public debate in Switzerland also on popular media. So now there is a big ongoing debate.
On the second day of this course, there was a small discussion about whether curiosity itself is justifying animal research. So some people said that, also here we see where the medicines come from. But is this perspective that we only can conduct animal research if it aids humans? Do you think there's a case to be made for curiosity and the sake of knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a case that can be made, but you also have to be mindful that the public perceptions of, the moral value of curiosity might be smaller than the moral value that they attribute to animal welfare. So even though that's a clear example of ethical conflict between two different ethical principles, and most people tend to lean more towards the side of animal welfare and a no harm principle as applied to animals as compared to the moral value that they attribute to the pursuit of knowledge and curiosity. This is there's something what you said that I think is very important, namely that the public campaigning conducted by the European Animal Research Association is heavily grounded on clinical research. And it seems to be that this is not only their main focus, but almost the entire picture. And I think it's very important for researchers in your field and in other fields that are not directly clinical, even though they might have long-term clinical spillover, but to highlight the importance of that research, also without coupling directly the moral value of that research to the direct moral value for individual human beings. Because otherwise, from a moral perspective, that would be, we would be in the corner, fighting from the corner.
I guess the early survey the first survey that you showed kind of conflates the issue of people's moral judgments about animal research with their misinformation about how that research is conducted, which is what you showed later. Mm-hmm. Because, maybe a certain percentage of people would say they would disapprove of animal research, but if they knew that there are all these rules and so on, then maybe they would judge that it is okay. So I wonder if, for example, if you ask people if curiosity-driven research is okay, you would get different results if you informed them more about how that research is conducted and the rules that people have.
I mean, you're right. For each moral beliefs, there might be almost innumerable amount of moral reasons for that. And some reasons that people have to hold a certain belief might not be directly moral, but more related to other types of information, such as access to information or transparency of information and so on. So this is certainly possible, but in a survey it's pretty hard to control for all possible variables, for all possible reasons that people hold a certain belief for. This is something that could be more easily done with open-ended qualitative research, but there it's very hard to achieve statistically representative samples of the population. So you need to probably, complement these two ways of conducting public opinion research on this topic. All right, so we're here again at the interface between ethics and instinctive and innate behavior. And in the second part, I will focus a little bit more on the innate and instinctive basis of human morality. So if we go back to the definition of neuroethics as the ethics of neuroscience and the neuroscience of ethics. The first part about the ethics of animal research would fall between the first category. It's about the ethics of neuroscience, about how neuroscience research should be conducted. This second part will be more about the neuroscience of ethics, but then I will go back to the ethics of neuroscience again. All right, so the reason why there is ongoing debate about the innate and instinctive basis of human moral behavior in relation to ethics and innate behavior is this general idea of moral instinct that has been popularized by Steven Pinker, who in 2008 reviewed and summarized a growing body on research from Joshua Greene and Jonathan Haidt and other people about the moral, the innate underpinnings of the human moral faculty. And he presented that in analogy to Chomsky's theory of a universal grammar in cognitive linguistics. He said, the same way as, according to Chomsky, we are born with a universal grammar that forces us to analyze speech in terms of its grammatical structure, with no conscious awareness of the role that it plays. By analogy, we are born with universal moral grammar that forces us to analyze human actions in terms of its moral structure, with just as little awareness. So this is just a summary of a big body of research that is trying to look at human morality as innate behavior. And in Pinker's and Haidt's view, four cornerstones of moral behavior in humans can be identified from nativist perspective, which are psychological altruism, Ingroup favoritism, harm avoidance, and purity. So how many here are conducting research on the evolution of cooperative behavior? All right. I guess some of the studies I'll share are quite redundant to you, but so this is a study conducted by a group of researchers in Chicago that tries to create an experimental setting for disposition for identifying disposition for empathy and psychological altruism. Psychological altruism is defined in the field of ethics as opposed to biological altruism to the extent that is occurring in absence of self-interest and reward. So in this particular experimental setting, there is mouse that has to perform 3 different tasks. The first task is supposed to open the door of this little plastic container containing fake puppet mouse. In the second one, it's a rat, sorry, yeah. And in the second one, the container is empty. And in the third one, there is a fellow inside. As you can see, probably, does it go? All right. So only in this third setting, the rat opens the door and tries to help the other rat, which doesn't occur in the other two. And again, this is occurring in absence of reward. So this study, as there are similar counterparts of studies of this kind involving primates and humans. So this is a study by Felix Warneken and Michael Tomasello, who tried to create a similar experimental setting for 18-month-old human infants. There was a group of 24 18-month-old human infants that were presented with 10 different goals, 10 different situations involving a similar goal of helping another person, where this other person was an adult, a male experimenter, that was indeed pretending he was having a trouble achieving a goal, like reaching an object that was out of reach, like a paper ball, a marker, or a cap, or avoiding a physical obstacle, like wishing to open a cabinet and not being able to, and other types of settings. And the research showed that 22 out of 24 infants helped immediately the experimenter with a very short average latency of 5.2 seconds in at least one of the 10 tasks. So these are just examples of research on human cooperation that are allegedly highlighting some innate components of human morality, in this particular case in relation to psychological altruism. Another building block of human morality from a nativist perspective that was argued for by Pinker and Jonathan Haidt was Ingroup loyalty and favoritism. Ingroup favoritism is the tendency to be more helpful to members of one's own group rather than those out-group, and it has been shown to occur in a large body of research in relation to real-world salient groupings such as ethnicity, religiosity, political affiliation, and it has also been artificially manufactured in the lab using trivial groupings. Some researchers argue that in-group favoritism is highly correlated with feelings of nationalism in modern society, and perception of fear in relation to migrants, which is, as you know, a phenomenon that is on the rise in many European countries. But again, these explanations generate a few philosophical questions that I will address later on. And you know, of course, there is a component of the definition of in-group favoritism that is well explained in nationalist movements, and this is something that these pictures show. The idea of putting certain group of people in a prioritarian moral scenario as compared to another group is something that is very common among nationalist movements, which of course it's not logically possible that they can all be right simultaneously.